named tweet here today. It's called Bumper Stuck. Bumper Stuck. And it's essentially a collection of bumper stickers. I'll name them off, and then we'll go through them one by one and dissect them. Bumper Stuck. Individual agency is real. Words are not actions. Thoughts are not crimes. Groups are not people. Mind reading is impossible. Inner reality is subjective. We always have a choice. Judge others by character. Free speech defeats hate. Live by love. Okay, so let's go through these bumper stickers and talk briefly about each one of them. So, individual agency is real. On this channel, we focus on individual agency and everybody having their own unique perspective on the world. 7 billion plus people living here, and we all have our own unique perspective, and we all have agency. Humans operate in a realm of what I call irrational free will. That means it's not deterministic. We all have choice. We all have agency. And yes, we are heavily, heavily conditioned by cultural engineering and other things, our parents, our friends, ourselves, our geological location, and so on and so forth. There's so many factors that go into what make us, us, and why we think the way we do. This is where rational free will comes in. Rational free will is the fact that since the Big Bang, there's been so many, countless quadrillion to the 10th power, etc., particle collisions and events, cells moving and shaking at the microscopic level, and so forth. And of course, there is this sort of deterministic element to that things go the way they go, that organisms move in a survivalistic direction, they move forward, and they try to survive. And this has informed so much of our reality from the word go, based on current scientific evidence and data. But I say that, of course, individual agency is real. You are not controlled by a cult. You're not controlled by a cult leader. You're not controlled by other people. Your actions are your own. They may be misinformed. They may be irrational. Well, we have this thing called irrational free will. It means that human beings don't always conform to rational free will. They don't conform to the behaviors deeply coded into their DNA over millions and billions of years. We do things that, we make our best effort, or we do things that are the opposite of what we believe to be the right way to go. And sometimes we do those things that are opposite on purpose, just to say that we have that free will, and that happens to be part of our free will, our coded rational free will, the behaviors that we are, coded to have. You expect somebody that likes to say the opposite or says irreverent things, you can almost predict that they will say irreverent or irrational things at a point. So even the irrational can be somewhat predictable. You can have a predictive filter on that. That said, I don't preach that on this channel. I preach irrational free will, and I say that, it's up to you what you do. You can't, if you get a signal or a message from somebody else saying, do this, do this, do this, they're not controlling you. You're controlling you. That's really what it breaks down to. Individual agency is real, and we must remember that. Can't blame others for our actions. We must remain accountable and responsible. That leads into the second bumper sticker, words are not actions. Now, I am largely a free speech absolutist. There are some areas where I don't advocate full free speech, things like credible threats, direct harm, doxing, slander, libel, defamation, unconsented pornography, there are some areas where cases where direct harm is being inflicted, things like inciting violence. I don't think that that should be part of free speech. It's too destructive. But words are not actions. So if you look at a couple of children on a bus and one child sitting down talking to the other children, and then the other children start punching him, that punch is an action. It's a violent, irrational action. They're punching the other child. His words don't do anything. They can bounce right off of you if you'd like. You can ignore them. They don't physically affect you in any meaningful way. So words are not actions. Words can lead to action. Words can influence action. But words by themselves are just words. And if you live pathos first, you don't have a logos first perspective on philosophy, you live focusing on emotions, yeah, words can easily incite people to do things that they shouldn't do. But I say, of course, words are not actions. At the end of the day, no matter what you can say, words are words. And only if there is a specific action associated with them, a specific thing that's going to happen if you say that word. If you're Captain Picard on the Starship Enterprise and you say, make it so, engage, you're, whatever happens, happens. But of course, people have individual agency, and if the captain says, I want you to kill all of us right now, send us into that nearest star cluster, warp speed, warp 9, make it so, engage. Well, you have individual agency, Mr. Data. Well, maybe not Mr. Data, because you're an android. But hey, Commander Riker or Counselor Troy, you have individual agency. You can say, well, Captain, get screwed. Okay? We're not going to just follow you blindly into the night. Words are not actions. Next one is thoughts are not crimes. Thoughts are not crimes. And of course, people get into this mindset that if somebody says something or if somebody expresses an opinion, it's intolerant or it's offensive or it shouldn't be allowed or it should be censored, it should be removed from the public square. It's not viable, it's not acceptable dialogue, it's not in that window. And so we should remove it. We should make that choice. Now, of course, when I talk about free speech, I like to say the fact that I am defining free speech for you should be a red flag, because anybody that defines free speech is authoritarian by nature. You don't listen to my views on free speech. I just tell you what my perception is of it. Okay, I'm defining it for myself and in general for you, and you should take that with a grain of salt. But thoughts are not crimes. So we have a number of people out there that are being suppressed and silenced and demonized by the press and by other people, by society, for having the wrong thoughts. And wrong, of course, being subjective. A lot of these thoughts, if they don't hold any scientific or factual merit, if you can't look at it and gather empirical evidence, if you can't reason with it or rationalize it in any way, of course, the thought might not have much merit, but of course this is up for the public opinion, the court of public opinion, to decide. And of course, things like public consensus. Now, of course, we shouldn't just go by public consensus. Just because 80% of people say something doesn't mean it's right or wrong or anything. But thoughts are not crimes. We shouldn't be trying to get into the business of you can't think this way or it's a crime or you're a bad person or you're a pariah now. That just breeds hate, and we don't want to breed hate. And part of this is the next one here. Groups are not people. Groups are not people. So if you're in a collectivist mindset versus an individual mindset, if you're in this collectivist thing versus this individual thing, you might go, well, you are the labels that we ascribe to you. If I put an adjective or a descriptor before your name, well, that's what you are. You're in that group now. I've assigned an association to you. And then you have your immutable characteristics. Oh, you're white, you're black, you're Asian, you're Native American, you're anything. You're Hispanic, you're any immutable characteristic like race or skin tone. Oh, you're male, you're female, you're in that group. Okay. You have a gender, you have a sexual orientation, you have a religion. Some of these are mutable and some of these are immutable. Okay? You have a job, you have hobbies, you have an ideology, you have all these different things. And the fact is that groups are not people. Groups are organizations of people by certain labels, by certain qualifiers. People themselves are far too complex to put into a singular box or a number of boxes. Now, of course, we can all in many ways be broken down into certain labels, but that is a filter on reality. That's a window into reality, not the truth, the hard truth. It's one perception, one version of what reality is. Me personally, I don't like to default to viewing people by their immutable characteristics. I don't like to say, oh, this white woman, this black man. I try to stay away from that unless it's necessary. Okay? When we start using that, of course, to incite division, to create division between people and put them against each other and say, well, hey men, women bad, you're going to create misogynists. And then when you have, hey women, men bad, well, that's third wave and largely fourth wave feminism that states that men are the oppressor and women are the oppressed. People get conditioned with that messaging again and again and again by saying, well, the group. And they start missing the forest for the trees. And there are 7 billion trees. There are so many people out there with their own perspective, their own actions, their own merits and flaws, their own character that need to be assessed. They are individuals. They're not just the groups they associate with. They're not the people they talk to. They have a individual lens. And that's what I'm saying when I say groups are not people. Next up is mind reading is impossible, but you wouldn't know it if you've been on Twitter or other social media outlets lately, because people tend to try to mind read. They try to project their thoughts onto you, and they say, well, what you're saying is this, and they put out their thought of what they think you're saying. Now again, it's okay to put something out and say, well, are you saying this? And then you have a chance to clarify. But people don't take that step of, well, are you, or they don't ask you to clarify. They basically state your position for you, and then it's up to you if you decide, do you want to clarify now that they've already put out their bias, their confirmation about what you're saying. Are they too far from you position-wise for you to bring them in and get them closer? And it becomes a time sink if people are presenting the wrong opinion that you don't have. You know, it's all about how you approach debate. I don't like to police debate or police speech. I like to give tips, of course, to help people have a nicer time. But mind reading is impossible, and people, of course, will ascribe to you all the reasons you're doing something. Well, you're doing something because you're immutable characteristic A, or you're immutable characteristic B, or maybe you have this job, or maybe you've been born here, or maybe you have this, or maybe you have that. This is why you're doing it. That's all attempted mind reading. It's just attempted mind reading. When they say you're doing this because this. Well, no, you don't know the reason why I'm doing this. I know the reason why I'm doing this, and I know the reasons that I have communicated that I'm doing this, but you really don't know unless you're in my head or I'm in yours, whoever it might be that you're trying to mind read. Unless you have Neuralink, you can't read minds. Elon Musk, get on that. I think the Twitter audience you have will quite enjoy it. So, you can't get in somebody's head. You can only go by what it seems like they are suggesting. And I say more information is better, so definitely ask questions, clarify, and of course, if someone says something out of line, Scott Adams recommends the 48-hour rule to allow them time to apologize if apology is warranted. But mind reading is impossible. You can't mind read somebody to determine why their actions took place. And what people do is they go back to groups being people, and they look at the labels that they know you have, and they say, well, based on labels 1, 2, and 3, I think the reason you did this was this, and it's going to be really hard to convince me otherwise. Mind reading is impossible, folks. Never forget. The next one is inner reality is subjective. So, of course, I talk a little bit about inner and outer reality. There is the reality in our heads. Check out my new video on BitChute and YouTube, The Reality in Our Heads. And I talk a little bit about how we have our inner reality, and we also have the observable reality that's out there. It's out there in the world. What other people see, what the other 7+ billion people see and observe. But then we also have what we see through our 2 eyes, our window on the world. And of course, just like in a church, sometimes you have some colored glass. That's a lens. That's a filter you put over your inner reality as you look out. And you see what you see. You have a subjective view of what reality, the larger, the higher reality, outer reality is. And of course, we always have to keep that in mind. What are our biases? Where are my blind spots? I have many. You have many. We all have many blind spots. What are those? And why are we having so much trouble getting over certain things that other people seem to accept so openly and graciously? So it is subjective. We have our view, and it's, to us, it might be right or it might be wrong, but to others, it could be totally different. They might have their own, well, they do have their own subjective view of what's going on because they're one person. They're an observer, and they, you're a participant, you're an observer, but you participate from your perspective, you participate from your eyes, from your brain. You have this this world is being, it's created. It's an outer world. There's an objective, or as close as we can imagine, to objective world out there for us to observe and to enjoy and to participate in. But our window on that more objective world, the outer reality, is a subjective filter that's based on our own, biochemistry and so forth. So it is subjective. And we should always remember that. That way we don't get into this whole, right think and wrong think, because 2 people can look at one situation and see something different. All 2 people look at the same situation and see something slightly different. So with that in mind, inner reality is subjective. We always have a choice. So I like to talk a lot about negative liberty, positive liberty, and general libertarian beliefs on this channel. Of course, talking about individual agency and liberty, individualism, and being able to craft your own way. I say on my Twitter, create your own label, create your own brand, because you have a choice. You have a choice of how you're perceived. To some degree, people are going to judge you as they judge you. That's up to them. But how you present yourself and who you are, you have a choice. You always have a choice in terms of your actions. Now, I'm not saying that you have unlimited free will. We have limits. I can't just travel from here to Mars in a nanosecond. That can't happen. I can't just get a job at a very wealthy, for example, law firm or whatever it might be. I can't get a 6-figure salary like that. I have to work hard for it, and I have to know the right people. I have to get a little lucky to go with the merit and the character that I have. That might be good, my credentials and so forth. But we always have a choice. It's a good default. You have a choice. And if you put yourself in a situation where you don't have any choice, well, you're at a disadvantage. You want to be able to create a situation where you always have an out. You don't want to be boxed into one determined possibility. You want to be able to move around and say, well, if this isn't going well, then I'll try track 2. And if track 2 isn't going well, I'll go to track 3. And if track 3 isn't helping me out, I'll go back to track 1. And maybe now track 1 is working again. But there are, so many tracks. There are so many options in life. There are so many things we can do. We don't want to be boxed into, well, I'm stuck and I'll always be stuck. You can always change your reality by making different choices. And instead of going with the tide, you might want to go against it for a bit. Or instead of going against the tide, you might want to go with the tide. And I could make a billion analogies for this. I have all the choices in the world, and so do you. You have all the choice in the world. You always have a choice. And, you're not a slave to reality. There are only so many places you can go. This life, it's life and death. It's a bit of a zero-sum game. We all have nothing in the end except for our legacy and our family to pass on our genes. But you always do have a choice. And some of those choices are very difficult. They're very hard. But they exist nonetheless. The next bumper sticker is judge others by character. So don't look at their labels. Don't look at, what the color of their skin might be, what their gender is, what they do for work, who they support, who they talk to, what they do. If they support some really bad people, may it be in politics or entertainment, if they condone bad behavior, that's a negative character trait for the most part. But you want to judge by character. You want to look at the pros and the cons of how a person's interacted with the world, their words and actions. You don't want to look at them by anything they can't change. You want to look at things that they've chosen to do, that they have some agency over, they can choose to do. Their merits and their flaws, their character, not their immutables. And certainly not just the people that they talk to and associate with. Because, frankly, Scott Adams has talked about this a little bit, about association, freedom of association. We have it in this country and we should keep it. But there's this assumption that if you talk to somebody that's less than savory, how do you think, with individual agency and us all mind reading being impossible, if you encounter somebody that is a bad hombre, a bad person, by any objective standard, and you happen to talk to them and just want to communicate with them as a human being, well, does it make you a bad person for trying to learn more about this bad person? Like if you're just talking to them and treating them like a human being, you're not condoning their actions. You're not saying they were right to do whatever they've done that might be, objectively, subjectively wrong, right? But you're just talking to them. But some people say, well, you're condoning them. You're platforming hate. You're platforming somebody that doesn't deserve to have a voice. And I say, well, we could treat them like a total pariah. But then they'll just find other total pariahs that accept them. They'll gang up, and with all the confirmation bias of their echo chamber, who knows what they might do? They might start to be influenced to continue their bad behavior because all their friends are doing it. There's so many different things that could happen. They are not determined, but they're possible, and they become more likely the more factors you add. But you want to judge others by their character. You want to go by meritocracy as an ideal. You reward good behavior and you punish bad behavior. And if you like something, you give it kudos. And if you don't like something, well, you give it criticism. And you try to, if you're optimistic and positive, you try to help it improve or give positive feedback. So on that subject of putting people down and making them into pariahs, I say here, the next bumper sticker, number 9, free speech defeats hate. Free speech defeats hate. Now, there's this thing out there in the world called hate speech. Hate speech. It's a completely arbitrary term, very subjective. It's a construct. It's not any specific, there's no specific definition for it. It's whatever somebody wants to ascribe. It's a label for people to ascribe to things they don't like. May they be ideology or anything else. If they feel that criticism is undue, they might call it hate instead of love, as opposed to love. That's a very basic simplification of reality. If it's not love, it's hate. If it's not hate, it's love. But we do get into that absolutist thinking quite often. And especially in persuasion, you do want to simplify things. So it may appear that way on the surface when you're talking to somebody that understands persuasion and understands the idea of simplifying things. Yes, there may be these juxtapositions set up that might be a little bit too reductive. But free speech defeats hate because more speech, through free speech you get more speech. More speech defeats hate speech. You know, you want to be able to talk to people that might be, of course, spewing hateful dialogue, in your estimation, and ask them and clarify with them what they mean, what they're saying. And if you'd like, you can proselytize to them. You can persuade them and say, listen, I don't think you're on the right path here, and here's why. You can give them a reasoned explanation as to why their hateful dialogue is destructive. Maybe they know it's destructive. Maybe they are an irrational force that just wants to burn it all down. But you do want to allow for free speech, for these things to be said so that they can be publicly ridiculed. Okay? If something is wrong, you don't want it just relegated to a very condensed, very calculated and full of the same idea echo chamber saying that one thing that you don't like. You want it to be out there for people to be able to point to and say, excuse me, sir or madam, what you're saying is illogical, it is irrational, and it is filled with hate, and I think you should stop. You talk to people like that, at first, at least. Now, of course, if you're talking about the publisher versus platform debate on social media, the publisher should be able to make the site accessible and safe and fun for families and for all these people that don't want to be seeing things that are deliberately offensive. And of course, that is, to some degree, their, if you have a household, if you're a person, you can mute, you can block, you can, if you have a forum, you can kick people out, you can moderate. But we do talk about free speech as it occurs on social media. And social media I do consider to be the modern public square. I don't consider it a household. I consider it a place like Twitter, where millions, hundreds of millions of people use it. Facebook. I consider these places to be the modern public square because you have all these people. And this is the place, this is the city, this is the town of dialogue. I call it Twitter town. You have, it's not physical place, it's a digital place where people can come and congregate. And it's like the city. Like if somebody's on the sidewalk in a city and they say, well, fuck you. They have free speech, right? And even in 1946 or 1947, the Supreme Court ruled that a small privately owned company town had to abide by the First Amendment. So I say we need an Internet Bill of Rights so that U.S. firms especially, and all the dialogue contained on their site should be under the same rules of the First Amendment. And people will say, of course, well, the First Amendment protects freedom of speech is about government controlling speech. It's about government. And I say, well, if you have post-governmental entities like Facebook and Twitter, where they're housing like 80% of the dialogue, and they're just arbitrarily, they have protections against liability, so they're treated like they're a public. They're treated like a platform, but they have the curation abilities of a publisher. So I say you need to pick one, publisher or platform. I say they should be platform. They say they should be publisher because that gives them full, control as authors. But I do say, of course, that free speech defeats hate. Most of the people that are disciples of the modern religion of censorship will say, of course, we want censorship because it gets rid of hate. And I say, no, it just concentrates it. Ask Noam Chomsky. He has the same position on that. So definitely apply free speech if you want to whittle away at all those other unsavory things going on. And finally, live by love. Think positive. It's like Norman Vincent Peale says, the power of positive thinking. Live by love. Don't live by hate. Live by positive, not negative. Because in this world, we're going to die someday. We're not going to be here forever. And if we look inward and we don't look outward, we don't look to expand, but we look to contract, we are going to eventually, I don't think it's a very good mindset. I think that people should try to love as much as possible. Self-hatred, guilt, all these things, there's utility for them, and they're going to happen. They're going to happen. I'm not trying to police, hey, God and up above, whoever it might be. I am agnostic. I'm not trying to police human behavior. I'm not trying to police, what nature entails, the survivalistic tendencies of mammals and other species across this wonderful earth and across the universe at large. But I say we live by love. Look on the bright side. Keep the glass half full, not half empty. And try to accept people, accept differences, because diversity is a strength. But it starts with accepting our differences and seeing the pros and cons, the costs and benefits of both sides or all sides of a situation, not just focusing on hating on this. We have irrational hatred in our hearts. We have to direct it somewhere, but I say don't direct it at other people if you can avoid it. And do not direct it at your fellow countrymen. Like, if you're going to direct it at anybody, direct it at people that have actually wronged your country. Try to find a big enough banner that enough people can get under, and then learn to love, learn to accept the differences of the people under that banner. One banner that I love, the United States of America. I love it. Love being a patriot. So, some bumper stickers for you under my tweet, Bumper Stuck. Check it out on Twitter.